Does the account of creation in Genesis disagree with scientific discoveries? I mean, after all, doesn't the Bible say the universe was created in 6 days? And don't scientists say the universe is 14 billion years old? How can those agree? And then second, the order of creation in the Bible is so weird. You got light on the first day and the sun, moon, and stars on the fourth day. How does this all work? Can these really agree? So the first thing I want to talk about, and I want to tell you one way they might agree. Again, Christians have different views. I want to tell you one possible way that I think science and the account of Genesis mesh together. And we're going to start with the word day. The Hebrew word that we translate day is yom. And just like in English, the Hebrew word yom has lots of meanings. So let me try your English. If I tell you, in George Washington's day, the colonists fought the British in the Revolutionary War. What do I mean by the word day? In George Washington's day, the colonists fought the British. I mean some long period of time, right? They didn't fight them in one 24-hour period. If I say this, it's a beautiful day outside, what do I mean? Think about it. Most people get this one wrong. I mean right this moment, right? We might have had a tornado coming through an hour ago. We have those all the time in Oklahoma. But right now, the sun is shining. It's beautiful. So in that context, the word day means this moment. Now, ancient Hebrew is an interesting language because English has about 1 million words, but ancient Hebrew has about 3,000 words, 1 million to 3,000. And ancient Hebrew, in which Genesis was written in, does not have a word that means a long period of time, like our word epic or era. If you wanted to write that God created the universe in 6 periods of time, you would say 6 days. That's the best word to use. So that's one of the views. I think we'll just skip that. So one of the greatest Hebrew scholars of the 20th century who understood ancient Hebrew was a guy named Gleason Archer. And Gleason Archer writes, on the basis of internal evidence, by looking at the Bible, it is this writer's conviction that Yom in Genesis 1 could not have been intended by the Hebrew author to mean a literal 24-hour day. So I don't know ancient Hebrew. Maybe some of you read it. Maybe that's what you do in the morning. First thing you get up, get your coffee, and read ancient Hebrew. But Gleason Archer does. And he tells me that even though my English translation seems to make it look like a 24-hour day, if you were reading ancient Hebrew, that's not what you would pick up. And so what does the day mean? Well, there's lots of ideas. There are at least 11 possibilities that good biblical scholars think the word means. One is that it is 24 hours. One is that the 6 days of creation are like just what we call framework. They're like an outline. Roman numeral 1 is day 1, and Roman numeral 2 is day 2. One is that they're called analogical days. We really don't know. God's days are not our days. God keeps time different than us. And then one is this thing called the day-age theory, that each day is a long period of time. And I just want to go into that one in a little more detail because I know atheists who, because they've seen Genesis 1 in the day-age theory, have eventually become Christians. And so I don't know what the original author meant for sure, but this day-age theory meshes so well that I at least want to expose you to it if you've never heard about it. So in the day-age view, Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And science would tell us that took about 9 billion years to create the stars, the planets, the sun, the moon, the heavens, and the earth. So that's about 9 billion years. And then we get Genesis 1:2, which we'll talk about in the next slide. And then we get Genesis 1:3 and forward, which talks about the earth. God preparing the earth for humans. So the rest of Genesis 1 takes about 4.5 billion years, and each day is somewhere about 500 million years or so. Okay? So let's look at the Bible. Let's not look at science. Let's look at what the Bible really says. When I was studying this on my own to try to find the truth, what I found is that what people told me the Bible said was not always what the Bible said. And by reading it for myself, I was able to form some of my own conclusions. So here's the first thing. People often skip Genesis 1:2, but it's the key verse. If you skip Genesis 1:2, you miss everything. Genesis 1:2 says, "And the earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters." So let's see what it says and what it doesn't say. First, it only states that there was darkness on the surface of the deep. That's on the surface of the earth. It doesn't say the universe was dark. Most people think there's no light anywhere in the universe, but it doesn't say that. It says it's dark on the earth. Okay? We'll get back to that. It says the earth is formless and void, and water covers its surface. So if you were going to go back to the earth 4.5 billion years ago, when it was first formed, this would be the perfect description of it. It's formless, void, it's watery, and it's dark. Why is it dark? Is it dark because there is no sun and moon and stars out there? No, they're out there. They're burning brightly. But on the surface of the earth, there would be so much dust and debris and material in outer space that it would completely block the sun. It would be dark, just as the Bible says. It doesn't say it's dark everywhere. It says it's dark on the surface of the earth, and that is where it would have been dark 4.5 billion years ago. So now we're going to look at what happens starting from on the surface of the earth. So here's my statement. From a perspective on the surface of the earth, where the Spirit of God is moving, the Spirit of God is located at the surface of the earth. The story recorded in Genesis 1 remarkably follows the order of events as described by current scientific theories. So let's walk through those 6 days of creation. Day 1, God says, "Let there be light," and there is light. Where's there light? On the surface of the earth. So the early atmosphere changes from completely dark to what we call translucent. It allows light to come through. So all this junk in outer space begins to settle. And on the earth, you would see light and darkness. You would see day and night. You'd never see the sun and the moon and stars. It's just like a cloudy day or a cloudy night. But you would know it's day and night. And what does the Bible say? God says, "Let there be light," and there is light. And the light he called day, and the dark he called night. That's what you would see on the surface of the earth about 4 billion years ago. Day 2, God separates the waters above from the waters below. What's the waters above? Clouds. What's the waters below? Ocean. You start a water cycle. That's the next thing that happens. Some people teach this as some kind of weird waters above, but if you read it straightforward, what would you read if you said God made the waters above and the waters below and he put a sky in between them? Clouds and oceans. Day 3, God creates dry land and plants form. So the mostly watery planet develops continents. Now, about a few years ago, I was reading a book called Rare Earth, written by 2 scientists at the University of Washington. They're not Christians, they're not religious, they're not believers, but they had a super great plot that I stole from them. Okay, so here's a plot. And on the x-axis, on the horizontal axis, you have the age of the Earth, 4.5 billion years old, so the time since the Earth formed. And on the y-axis, you have the amount of land on the Earth. So on the far right is where we live now, way over to the right, and that shows you that now we have what's called 100% of the land. So the amount of land we have now, which covers about 1/3 of the Earth. So notice when the Earth was formed, how much land is there? There's almost none. It's all a watery planet. And it says, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters, because the planet's all water. And then sometime about 1.5 billion years after the Earth was formed, you go from mostly watery planet, see that steep rise, to mostly a land planet. And I was shocked. I was reading a book by secular scientists about the Earth being formed over the last 4.5 billion years, and they told me when day 3 occurred. Because God said the continents were formed on day 3, and there they are, going from a watery planet to a land planet. Science shows that there's a time, a short period of time geologically, where God said, let the continents be formed. And there they are. In plain black and white from scientific viewpoint. So day 4, God says the sun, to have the sun and the moon and stars appear. Now this always freaked me out. How can you have light on day 1 if the sun, moon, and stars don't come on till day 4? But now it makes sense. On the surface of the Earth, it was dark. Then finally you could see the light, and then finally, billions of years later, everything clears up enough so you can finally see the sun, moon, and stars. And this is exactly what the language of the text says. Ancient Hebrew doesn't have a past tense. They have what's called a completed tense. You could translate it, it's already done. And that's what it says about the sun, moon, and stars on day 4. I think it's verse 14. It says, they had been created. So God said, let them appear, let them be for signs and for seasons. Why? Because he had made them already. And they finally appear in the sky from the surface of the earth. On day 5, God creates sea life and birds and sea mammals. The Bible doesn't give every detail of creation. And it lists primarily the creatures that are important for humans. And so these are primarily the kinds of sea animals that humans would fish and the birds that they would interact with. And then on day 6, God creates land animals. And again, I don't think every animal is mentioned in the Bible. The words for cattle and beasts usually refer to the kind of animals that humans interact with. The kind they domesticate, the kind they hunt. So I don't think dinosaurs are mentioned in the Bible. In my view, they died out long before humans came along. And they're just not mentioned. And then finally, on day 6, God creates humans. And humans are unique. We're unique because we have a spirit that can commune with God. What makes me unique as a human? Is it that I use language? Well, dolphins use some kind of language. Is it that I use tools? Well, chimpanzees use simple tools. What makes me unique is that, as Pascal said, there's a God-shaped vacuum in me that only Jesus Christ can fill. And God created humans uniquely. They're the last thing created. And science tells us that. There's been no change since humans came along the planet. We don't know exactly when, 50,000 years ago maybe. But since humans came along, we're the last greatest creation of God. So the order of creation is perfect. You start with the creation of the heavens and earth. The earth is formless and void and dark, not anything else. Light appears on the surface of the earth. The water cycle begins. Continents form. Plants come from the ground. The atmosphere becomes transparent, and you can finally see the sun, moon, and stars. The fish and the birds fill the sea and the air. Higher life forms fill the sea, and then mammals that man interacts with are created, and finally God creates man.